Well, hello, and welcome to I Love Gay today. And we are in the UK today, and we're looking into it's a whole different field that a lot of us don't know a lot about, the whole world of education and the LGBTQ community. Hey, we're here with Joseph and Adam. How are you guys?
Hi, thank you for having us.
Hello, yeah, I'm doing well. It is the first sunny day that we've had in May, so I'm feeling great.
It feels like the first sunny day in 2021, actually, so it's very nice.
Well, June is just right around the corner, so that sounds like about right.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. And we were talking earlier. It's like if it wasn't for Twitter and the way we're able to discover individuals and organizations that we didn't know anything about, I would not know that you guys existed. But you have a podcast called Pride and Progress, and I'll read this off. A podcast that amplifies the voices of LGBT educators and celebrates the power of diversity. That's amazing. So, but yeah, just tell us a little bit about kind of the inspiration and what you guys do and how you came up with that.
Sure. So Adam and I are both teachers. Adam teaches in secondary school and I teach in primary school. And we kind of met through being involved in different LGBT educator events. So I ran a Pride event last year, which is kind of how I got in touch with Adam. And we kind of worked on a few things separately and together. Yeah. And then last summer, Adam suggested this idea of this podcast, and I was kind of immediately excited by it. Adam, I don't know if you want to talk through where it came from.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm doing my education doctorate at the moment, and I'm researching the experiences of LGBT teachers. And so as part of that, I was doing these amazing one-to-one interviews with these LGBT teachers and just sitting in awe, listening to their incredible stories and their incredible experiences and how empowering they are. And I thought it's a real shame that only I get to sit and listen to these interviews. And the idea kind of percolated for a while that it would be lovely to amplify them in some way. And then as Joseph said, through these various events and things we've done online and collaborated on, we kind of went for lunch one day and said, let's do something with this idea. It'd be so nice to kind of have these stories on record and share them with people. And that's kind of how it began.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think, because I noticed what you guys do, it's interesting because you've kind of you've jumped into this whole world of education, and not only are you bringing it to light to us, but you've kind of brought this leadership role to it, where you're bringing in a variety of different voices and different concepts and topics, and bringing them to the forefront in ways that nobody had ever done before.
We were really nervous, I think, initially when we first started off. We were nervous that we'd have similar conversations each week, and we'd touch on the same topics, and it'd become maybe repetitive after a while. But actually, all of the guests that we've had on have got such rich stories and are doing such great work that it's felt like every week has been a different conversation that has touched on different themes. And we say all the time, but I feel like I've learned so much from having these conversations with these incredible educators that are doing such good work, that I just hope that anyone that listens kind of feels the same way, that they're learning from it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And what's really nice is I think initially we just thought, it'll be a few teachers that listen, but the audience is really diverse. And we've had some lovely messages from people that aren't teachers or aren't in education, but actually they're just, in the way that you just described there, it gives them an insight into a world they perhaps haven't thought about. We all went to school at one point. When you're a child, teachers are kind of these mythical beings that don't have lives. They live at the school. And so to hear, I think to then hear that experience of an LGBT teacher, I think it's really powerful.
Well, especially now that it's, and even probably more so in your country and other countries compared to the U.S., where in our situation, every state kind of manages and deals with education at its own level, and so the whole world of LGBT issues, and going from a day when it was, if you were a gay teacher or lesbian teacher, you could be fired. So much has progressed here, but I think you guys are also kind of bringing those voices to parts of the world, including here, where it's there's still a lot of progress to be made.
Yeah, and I think the name is chosen very carefully of Pride and Progress, because we want to acknowledge that it's still not easy to be an openly LGBT teacher, but similarly there is enormous power in it, and that's very important as well. We need to, there's progress to be done and we need to work towards that, but we must celebrate the great things that have happened. We've come a long way since Section 28 in the UK, which we might talk about in a second. Yeah. And being open as an LGBT teacher has this enormous amount of power attached to it, and what we might call gay or queer capital. And that's what a lot of our participants talk about, the enormous kind of the ability it's given them to create these very meaningful relationships with colleagues and students. And we think it's important that we do celebrate it in that way, because often it's talked about in very serious tones or very much about the issues of bullying and discrimination. But actually, the language of celebration is also important.
Well, it's interesting because, speaking of Section 28, I mean, I was a kid a teenager and young adult in the 80s. And so things that were going on, with Margaret Thatcher and in the UK, a lot of times we didn't know. And so Section 28 was one that now I've become educated and learned about it through you guys and the posts. You have a lot to say about that.
I do. Me and Adam often talk about how we've almost become kind of retrospectively angry about Section 28 and the impact that it had on our education. Adam was in school kind of under Section 28. I was in school at the beginning of my schooling was under Section 28, and I kind of was educated in the shadow that followed it. And it's a terrible thing. And I think what people talk a lot about Section 28 as this terrible time in the history of education in the UK. But what we talk about quite a lot is that actually, I think we still live in the shadow that is cast by Section 28. I think that it created this silence around LGBT lives in education, and it created this shame around conversations of diversity that really we still see a lot now. And so many of the guests that we've spoken to on our podcast talk about how their views of what is acceptable within a school, what is acceptable within a classroom, were heavily shaped by their experience under Section 28. So when they stepped back into education as a teacher, it's really hard to build inclusive classrooms and to have really open and honest conversations that celebrate LGBTQ lives, because we have no model for that. All of us went to school where we were kind of starved of that representation. So it becomes almost like building an inclusive education becomes almost like trying to build a jigsaw, but you've lost the box that has the picture on. So you're trying to build this picture of an inclusive education, but there's no reference point for that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. For those in the world that don't know what Section 28 is, what is it?
So in 1988, Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative government introduced Section 28 as part of the Local Authority Act. And the actual wording of it was, I might get this slightly wrong, but I think it said that any school that is maintained by the government, so at the time that was the majority of schools in the UK, shall not intentionally promote homosexuality, or, and the worst part I think is, or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And that really catches in my throat every time I say it, because it's saying teachers are forbidden from promoting acceptability, which is just an awful sentence. And although under Section 28, so it ran from 1988 to 2003 when it was finally repealed, there was no actual legal prosecution of a teacher who was kind of prosecuted as a result of promoting the acceptability of LGBT lives. But there was this huge fear that was built by councils and by schools and by local authorities and parents at times that kind of forced schools and forced teachers to be silent on the issue. So it was kind of a long period of time where there was this huge silence built around LGBT lives. And one of the really damaging things is that it meant that anyone who was being bullied or was being discriminated against because of their sexuality, often in many schools that was completely overlooked, because teachers were fearful that if they stepped in and they supported young people, then that would be promoting the acceptability of homosexuality, and that would put their job at risk.
Yeah, I think people forget how recently it was as well. You know, like Joseph said, it was repealed in 2003 in England, 2000 in Scotland, not that long ago whatsoever. And I think on Twitter the other day, someone shared a clip of Margaret Thatcher talking about this. And, you know, there's that classic soundbite that we're teaching children have the inalienable right to be gay. Yeah. And somebody commented, this is a deep fake, right? This never really happened. It's like, yes, this actually happened. This is the rhetoric that surrounded this in the late 80s and into the 90s, but recent history.
Yeah, but it probably wouldn't surprise you if I tell you that at least from my perspective, it's still going on. It shows how related we all are in the world, and how connected. And in that connectedness, certain states are pushing forward transgender issues and so forth that very much reflect the same things that may have faded away a bit in 2003 for you. So, you guys, I think you give us hope. And that's why I said you guys are kind of creating this leadership position, but not trying to dominate the sound bites. You're just simply allowing others to be able to share their voices and stories about such things with us.
Yeah.
I think sorry, Adam.
Go ahead.
I think what you talk about in terms of having kind of state by state rules and different systems of education in different states, we kind of see that on a much smaller scale in the UK still, in that there are some areas and some schools where there is fantastic work going on around diversity and equity and inclusion. And there are some schools and some areas where we might as well still be in 1988 because nothing's changed. And it is that kind of postcode lottery where some children are really fortunate to have an education that allows them to see themselves or to build empathy with people who are different to them. And some people just don't get that. And I think that obviously it's at a much bigger scale in America with this kind of the state system, but we still have that here where it is really fractured.
Yeah, and the great charity Just Like Us did some research and found that 40% of schools in the UK have no LGBT content in their curriculum and anything like that. So yeah, where it's done well, it's done really well, but there's still a massive void.
I'm an optimist, and I still feel it's getting better. So
Absolutely.
It's just a bit of a bumpy road sometimes. But what does all this look like for your future? I mean, where do you guys plan to go with all this?
Go on, Joseph.
Good question. So Adam and I, in the initial conversation we'd said, right, there's so many great stories. We know a handful of people that are doing great work. Let's get 8 conversations recorded and release them as podcasts. Yeah. And what happened was that actually we kind of got really carried away with how great the conversations were and how great the stories that the people were sharing were. And we recorded kind of way more than we initially anticipated to. So I think by the end of this kind of first series, we're going to have a series of maybe 12 conversations with LGBT educators sharing the work that they're doing. Yeah. And I think then what we have is a bank of stories and a wealth of kind of knowledge as a community with Adam and I and all of the guests that we've spoken to. Yeah. And I suppose the next thing that for me is thinking about how we kind of make that more widely shared and how we bring this kind of work into those primary schools where nothing's happening or those high schools where they haven't diversified their curriculum.
Yeah, and I think it's about contributing to that amazing space that feels like it's emerging. Like we talked about Twitter earlier, and for all of its downsides, it's an amazing tool, and I wish I discovered it sooner, really, because the sort of LGBT education network is incredible. It's vast, and people want to share resources. And there's great networks like LGBT Ed and Courageous Leaders, and there's loads and loads and loads out there. So we're just contributing a small part to what is a burgeoning space, and hopefully something we're going to contribute, like Joseph said, look at the schools where things aren't happening and try and give some suggestions and help and support about how they can be more inclusive.
Sounds like you're going to be able to kind of weave some of those various stories together into kind of a more comprehensive narrative, something that's a little like overarching that tells a story based upon all those different voices.
Yeah, I think there's power in the growth, because you're right, because we've had, like Joseph said, we had a few stories to begin, but now all these individual stories are starting to contribute to this much wider narrative about this development and growth and progress, and we need to shout that from the rooftops, don't we?
All these things that have developed during the age of COVID.
Yeah, because we first talked about it, it was like, okay, well, we won't do the podcast until we can do it in person. It's like, well, actually, everyone's sat at home with nothing to do. It's the perfect time to do it, really.
And what's great is, so Adam and I really only met as a result of COVID, because the initial kind of conversation that we had was because I'd suggested hosting a celebration of Pride Month last year because we couldn't go out and celebrate it in the way we would normally do and meet with people in the way we normally would. I'd made that suggestion and then Adam got involved. But really, if it wasn't for COVID, that event wouldn't have happened and this conversation wouldn't have happened and the podcast probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. Same with this show. So we're in sync on many ways. So, but no, more importantly, I'm just really glad you guys were able to take a few moments and share some of your story, especially with folks, like I said, around the world that may not necessarily know a lot about what you guys are dealing with there and the progress you made. So I think it's fantastic. And I look forward to being able to connect with you all in the real world when I do travel. And I'd love to get up that way.
Great. Well, we'd love to do something. That'd be awesome.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, and thank you so much for your time and for speaking with us. It's quite nice to be on the other side of the table for once and not doing the interviewing.
I'm doing the same this afternoon, so I concur. Well, thanks again for being here, and we'll connect soon.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care, Matt.
Take care now.
It feels good, so good.